Hey, it is great to see all of you today, and I want to welcome all of the roomies, our Zoomies, thank you for being with us here today. We have had a lot happen since we last got together. And we're going to talk about the politics, but I'm going to talk about a few other things. Before I get started, I want to introduce a few people here today. I want to start with the members of our board who have been so instrumental in making everything happen. I'm going to start over here with Terry Herekasi. Terry, give her a wave there. And then Dr. Ellen Brady right here. The Donna Kelly. The Donna Kelly. And we've got Wendy, with Dr. Wendy Davis over here. And we've got Mitch. Mitch, give us a wave here. All right. Oh, and that's right, Lisa. Lisa, yeah. She's our program director. She's responsible for this today. She and Wendy. So thank you. We also have a number of elected officials and candidates with us here today, and I want to thank all of them. I'm going to start with Carol. Representative Carol Cann. He represents part of Murray. And with Representative Wheatley, Mark Wheatley. He represents part of Murray. D. Gray. D ran in West and South Jordan. Thank you, D. And we've got Katie back here. Kate, give us a wave. She's the chair of the Utah County Democrats. Give us a wave. Yeah, I know. Have I missed or someone? Oh, yes, that's right. Oh, Lanny, that's right. Oh, Lanny, that's you. Lanny. Oh, Lanny, that was so good. And we've got Senator and Representative retired Patrice Harris. There you go. And one of my personal favorites, Mr. Cale Weston. Cale, give us a wave, Cale. He's down in southern Utah, talking to candidates that ran in southern Utah. And we might hear a little bit from Cale about how it's going on down there.
And Jeremy. And
oh, yeah, Jeremy.
Chris. Jeremy and Chris also ran.
And Chris. Where's Chris?
He's right there.
Oh, you are. Hi, Chris. Thanks for running.
Thank you.
Okay. Now. So, since the last time we met, we had drag queen bingo night. And that was so fun. And I want to thank Josie Valdez, she is a party in a box. She showed up and we had a party. I want to thank everybody who donated prizes, like Dr. Brady here and Terry Herekasi, everybody that donated prizes and auction items. Thank you so much. That was a really, really fun night. We had our Kate Kelly event. I think several of you were there when we got to see Kate Kelly. And I want to report that Kate Kelly left our event. Oh, thank you, Mitch. I wonder. Left our event and flew directly to Las Vegas, where she, stand up and tell them, Donnie, stand up. This is Kate Kelly's mom.
Spent almost 3 months in Las Vegas, and she had been asked to go there and head up the effort to put a state equal rights amendment in the Nevada Constitution. And so she went there. The prospects were the polls were saying 50-50 at best. They didn't know if it would pass, but she got a lot of people involved and drove a great big huge Ford pickup truck with the head wrapped with all kinds of equality, slogans on it all over, and I had a great time. And they won by 57%. So what's fairly unique is they use the language of the national ERA that they modeled it on, but they added a bunch of categories. They added it was for no discrimination for race, sex, sexual orientations, age, several categories they added that were not in the national ERA. So it's quite equality for lots of groups that it protects. So I was very excited to see that they won.
Yeah, and they won big. Great. Nevada has been a real leader when it comes to equal rights. They have really been a leader. I want all of you to know that the Women's Democratic Club has joined the Reproductive Coalition Roundtable. That's a lot to say, but that's the ACLU and Planned Parenthood and Alliance for a Better Utah, several organizations coming together to develop an overall strategy around how we're going to tackle this in Utah. So we're part of that. Donna is representing us on that roundtable as well, so thank you for that. We also sponsored a table at the Eleanor Roosevelt Awards Luncheon, where we got to watch WDC member Janie Iwamoto accept that award. She was so gracious. She was just lovely. And we had 8 free tickets and we gave them to WDC members. We have awarded 10 scholarships for women to attend the Political Development Series that's going on right now. I know at least Sharon's here. Sharon, she's going. She's one of our attendees. And I think Angie Tarbett was going to come down from Ogden, but I don't see Angie. Anyway, they're going and they're taking the class and it's good, isn't it? Great. And
Did you want me to say, oh, no, it's crap?
yeah, no, don't say that.
Yeah.
We need more women to go through this. Okay, and in addition to all of this, we were doing campaigns, right? We've been out knocking on doors. I've got hip bursitis. My doctor told me I just knocked on one too many doors. Beginning January 1st, the board has decided to create some additional membership options. And you'll see it on your table there. The membership dues is not going to change. It's going to stay exactly the same, but you will have an opportunity to become an advocate or an activist or an angel member of the Women's Democratic Club. And this will give us an opportunity to raise a little more revenue so that we can support more candidates. So thank you for that. The details are on your table if you want to take a look at that. I'm going to turn the mic over now to Program Director Lisa Petty. She'll tell you about what's coming up, and then we'll get started on our event today.
Thanks, Robin. Thank you all for coming today, especially for our guests, James Curry and Damon. Cann. But coming up, and Wendy will introduce them shortly. December 3rd, our next meeting, we're going to have Wendy Gavin. She's the founder and executive director of Unsheltered Utah. And Trisha, okay, and Trisha Davis, the assistant director of the Utah State Homeless Services. They're going to be speaking to us about homelessness, what they're doing, what's being done in the state. And what you'll find on the table is some a list of donations, items they need. So if you want to bring donations for that group, that would be really helpful. Bring them on December 30th or December 3rd for our next meeting. Then on January 14th, we're going to have a really nice a luncheon where we're going to celebrate our accomplishments from the past year. We're going to do a year-end review of the group's activities and preview the goals that the board will set for the next year. In addition, we'll have a legislative representative. We're not sure who yet will be the elected representatives from the legislature to speak about and preview what's coming up in the legislative session. So I hope you can plan to join us for both of those next upcoming events. Thanks.
Come on up, Dr. Davis. I want to quickly recognize Nate. Nate Willing. You've got it. Have you said that you're the new senator? I mean, you're taking it. All right, on that. Yeah, great race. Great race. Thank you, Nate. That was fabulous.
Thank you, Robin. Well, good morning, everyone. It's really delightful to see you all here. It's great to be in person and be able to be indoors. So we're still in a global pandemic, but it's good to be able to gather together in person, and grateful for our folks who are joining online as well. Before I introduce our two speakers today, I wanted to stop for just a minute. I know we're going to talk about celebrations in January, but there's a lot to celebrate with the Women's Democratic Club. I could not be more proud of this group of people to be associated with. When Robin and I and our committee started talking, like, how can we make a difference this year? We decided to mobilize our membership, which we haven't done before. And you all stepped up in amazing ways. So we held 4 canvassing events. The first one was for Liz and Claire, Liz Wade and Representative Claire Collard, Davina Smith down in Moab, Lynette Wendell and Hope Gerkeritz on the west side. And then we went up to Ogden to support Rosemary Lesser and Monica Hall. We had collectively over 100 people show up for those events, and we should be so proud of that. We wrote postcards, stuck envelopes, addressed them, and got out and knocked doors. I was privileged to go with people who'd never canvassed before and say, I'll be your buddy, you got this, it's not that hard, let's do that. So there's so much to be proud of. In the last 3 weeks after ballots dropped, I know several of our members worked with campaigns to do GOTV, get out the vote, and really centered around those candidates who we know are in really tight races. You might not know this, but I want you to know that our board decided that we were going to give everybody an election buddy. And we tried to text and call and email all of our candidates and let them know that we were supporting them. I can tell you as a candidate, it's a very lonely and solitary experience. And just to know that someone's got your back, we wanted our endorsed candidates to know that. So we also, for the first time, had people who sought our endorsements, which was really fun. And we're proud to use the WDC logo when they claimed all of their endorsements. So we're really proud of that. Robin gave out, like, she almost bullied you into getting a sign, especially for our county candidates. Every event that we were at, she brought armloads of signs and said, you're not leaving unless you're taking one for Lanny. You're not leaving unless you're taking one for Rosie. You're not leaving unless you're taking one for Suzanne. So we were all bullied into getting signs, and thank you, Robin. And many of you have known that I have personally crowned myself the down ballot diva, and I'm just so proud to support the down ballot candidates. Grateful that Kale's with us today. I wanted to give a shout out to Kale. Kale has been a true gentleman through all that's happened in the last 9 months and shown me the example of what it means to be a leader. And he probably doesn't want me telling you this, but Kale showed up in 100+ degree weather to knock doors for candidates. I know because I was there. So I just wanted to say thank you, Kale, for being a strong supporter of the Women's Democratic Club and underwriting our 4 canvassing events so that we could rent pavilions and provide water and food to our volunteers. So thank you for that. All right. I don't know about all of you. I'm like election fatigued. I couldn't sleep on Tuesday night. It was bad. I worked with campaign Lynette Wendell, and we had a really rough night on Tuesday. So anyway, it's been hard. You know, you get down on yourself if you didn't win this time. You wonder what you did right, what you did wrong, what you could have done differently. And I knew that that's what this Saturday was going to be like. So I thought of my friend Jim Curry, who I've known for years. Was one of my professors at the University of Utah, and asked Jim if he would be willing to speak to us today. And without hesitation, he said yes. We enlisted the help of Professor Damon Cann as well from Utah State University. So I'm going to invite both of them to come up just a little bit. Damon is the head of the Department of Political Science at Utah State University. He holds his PhD and master's in political science from Stony Brook University. He has been recognized for a couple of books that he's written, very prestigious in the political science academic circles. I know it's probably not interesting to all of you, but it's really a big deal. He also, what I think is fascinating about him, he's also been a public servant. He was the mayor of the city of North Logan, which I think is fantastic. Also a founding member of the Utah Debate Commission and a board member of the Utah League of Cities and Towns. So we are so Darlene McDonald, you guys stand up for Darlene McDonald. Darlene! thought it was like really boring until Darlene added, love you, Darlene. And speaking of Darlene, Dr. Jim Curry moderated the only debate between Burgess Owens and Darlene. So it's a much harder thing than it looks, I promise you. Jim did a fantastic job, and I'm sorry, but Darlene won that debate a million times over. So I've known Jim for a very long time. He's a professor at the University of Utah. He has a specialty in American politics with a focus on Congress. He's also written a couple of books. He's worked in Congress. He's worked for high-profile committees in Congress. He wrote a book called Legislating in the Dark, which I think you should all read, and The Limits of the Party with one of his friends and mentors, Francis Lee. So I'm going to turn it over to these two fine gentlemen, who I think are going to give us some things to think about and have left plenty of time for conversation. Who's going first?
Who do you want to go first? Alphabetical.
Let's do, I don't know, alphabetical, they both have C names. Let's, Jim's gonna talk about federal races, right? So it might not have been a really interesting federal situation in Utah, but there's a lot going on in the United States Congress and Senate right now. So I'm gonna hand it over to Jim. If you can kind of stay over here, they'll be able to see. Okay. You'll be very proud, sorry.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for letting me come here today and talk to you all. Wendy invited me some weeks ago and asked me to come and talk about what happened in the 2022 midterms at the national level, to give you some context and some insight. It's always a fun thing to say yes to when you don't know what's going to happen yet. And then it turns out it's 5 days later, and we still don't really know what happened because we're still counting votes. But I'm going to tell you what we know. I'm going to give you the context of what things were going in the night, and tell you what happened or what we know what happened. And I'm going to try to give you a little bit of insight about why what happened, at least as far as we know now. So all of it with a pinch of salt, at least, because still a number of races undecided and lots of votes still being counted out there. So what was the national context going into this fall's midterm elections? So typically what we expect to see, and what has typically happened in modern American history, is that whichever party controls the presidency doesn't do so well in that midterm election, especially the first midterm election after the president is first elected. So that's where we were. 2022, Joe Biden and the Democrats had won the White House, won the Senate in Washington. Spent the last 2 years in control. Joe Biden's approval rating was, not great, not disastrous, but in line with presidents who'd also seen their party lose a lot of seats in the past. His approval rating was around 42% at the start of November, which is almost exactly the same as Donald Trump's was in 2018. Only 2 points lower than Barack Obama's was in 2010, and only a point lower than Bill Clinton's was in 1994. All years where the president's party got wiped out in the midterms. The economic situation isn't necessarily great either. We definitely have a sluggish economy. I think it's maybe a generous way of saying it. There's a lot of economic problems out there. Since 1934, the president's party has lost an average of 28 House seats and an average of 4 Senate seats in the first midterm after the president's been elected. And in recent years, we've seen even bigger losses for the president's party. In 2006, the Republicans lost 31 seats in the House and 5 seats in the Senate. In 2010, the Democrats lost 63 seats in the House and 6 in the Senate. In 2018, the Republicans lost 41 seats in the House, though they picked up 2 seats in the Senate. So this was the context, and this is what a lot of people expected to see. And in fact, it's what national Republicans were hoping to see. Republicans in Washington were expecting to win between 20 and 30 new House seats and expecting to take control of the Senate. And privately, many of them were hopeful that there was an avenue for winning something close to 40 seats in the House, which would have given them a pretty big majority. Because as we know right now, going into the election, the Democrats held 220 seats in the House and the Republicans held 213. And a 50-50 Senate, of course. So what happened? Well, so far, and it seems like this is solidified at this point. There was no red wave. It's looking like Republicans in the House of Representatives will pick up fewer than 10 seats overall. It seems like the most likely outcome is they pick up 7 total seats. They'll hold about 220 seats in the House, which is a majority of just 2, minimum of 218 that you need to say you hold a House majority. There's still somehow a non-zero chance that Republicans do not take control of the House of Representatives. I think that chance is exceedingly unlikely with each passing day. However, the fact that it's this many days after election night and you can still say that the Democrats have a non-zero chance of holding on to the House of Representatives is quite remarkable given recent political history. And Democrats are now expected to win the Senate, with Arizona being called from our Kelly this morning. And with Nevada looking better and better for Senator Cortez Masto pretty much every time any votes come in. Where now she trails by just about less than 1/10 of the percentage points, I think. And with us going to a runoff in Georgia to decide the victory there. So odds are Democrats.
How many votes left in Arizona?
I don't know, but they called it. So at that point, I think the last I saw something like 75,000 votes, but Kelly's margin of victory makes it sort of out of reach. So on the whole, I'd say that's, when you put this in perspective of the context of what we typically see and what was expected going to election night, it was a pretty good night for the Democratic Party and a pretty bad night for the Republican Party. On the whole, national Republicans had a series of targets that they were going afterwards to try to win control of the House and the Senate. And in neither chamber did they do particularly well on their targets. In the Senate, they had 4 key races they were targeting: Pennsylvania, Nevada, Georgia, and Arizona. Pennsylvania was one to hold, but one that they saw as crucial to hold in order to win a majority. And then they saw Nevada, Arizona, and Georgia as the most likely places to pick up a seat, with some additional seats out there that they hope maybe in the best scenarios we could pick up 2, such as New Hampshire and Colorado. Of those core 4, they've now officially lost 3 of them. Or 2. I guess I'm projecting on Nevada. I think that's where Nevada's headed, though I can't say for certain now. Losing Pennsylvania, sort of a big blow to Republicans, and now losing Arizona as well. And it seems like Nevada is slipping away. They essentially needed to win a majority of those seats to take control. And it looks like at best they'll probably go, there's still possible they go 2 out of 4. 1 out of 4 seems very likely, and 0 for 4 still seems a possibility. In the House, Republicans going into election night had targeted 57 vulnerable Democrats that they were hoping to beat. Now you always go a little bit bigger than you think is reality. This was sort of like in the ultimate best case scenario, these are the 57 we'd hope to pick up. I checked this morning because a lot of these races are still outstanding, because a lot of these are among the tightest races in the country. But as of about an hour before I got in the car to come here, Republicans had either lost or were behind in 77% of those races. They've been successful in 11 of them, and we're ahead in 1.
Out of 57?
Out of 57. So that's not a terribly great success rate. And that tells you everything you need to know about how the night went for Republicans. They had these targets. These are the ones they'd hoped to win. And it didn't work out, including some very, very high profile House races where Republicans sank a lot of resources, including the Minnesota second district that they were unable to pick up, the Michigan 7th, where Lee Slotkin held on, Indiana 1st, which was one of the early races that came in, and sort of was even at 6 o'clock Eastern time, and it was sort of like an early indicator this might not be a good night for Republicans. And in the Virginia 7th, where Abigail Spanberger somehow has won now 3 times, which sort of an incredible accomplishment. So why has this happened? And I think it's really important to note that if not for Republicans' strong performance in upstate New York, they would probably be already on the way to losing the House races as a whole again. So really sort of one place in the country where Republicans performed at expectation, which is somewhat remarkable. You could throw Florida in there too, though that was more expected, I think. But why did this happen? Why did Republicans have what is essentially a bad night in the context? Why are Democrats holding on to the Senate, maybe even expanding the majority there? And why, at this point, is the best case scenario for Republicans to hold on to a narrow majority, the narrowest majority we'll have seen in the House since the 1990s? I think there's a few reasons, and all this is preliminary at this point, but we'll see where we are once all the data come in and we can really look at the votes. But I think one is that candidates matter. Who you pick to run in races matters, I think, more than people often expect. In a lot of these races where Republicans underperformed, they nominated candidates that did not have terribly widespread appeal in the places they were running. Pennsylvania's Senate race is sort of the poster child for this, where Republicans nominated Mehmet Oz, who not only had Trump's strong backing in a state where Donald Trump is not terribly popular, but had a number of other issues, including not really living in the state of Pennsylvania. All of these things dogged him throughout, and you saw the consequence where Democrats ran two very strong candidates at the top of the ticket for both governor and Senate. Republicans ran two very weak, relatively unpopular candidates in those same races. And this trickled down ballot, which the Democrats statewide performed well beyond expectations. Contrast this with Florida, where Republicans ran very strong candidates at the top of the ballot. Ron DeSantis is very popular in Florida. He's a very strong politician and a very strong candidate. And Republicans overperformed expectations in Florida. This suggests that who was picked to run in some of these races made a big difference. Interrelated with this is sort of the second reason Republicans probably struggled, which is just Donald Trump. Donald Trump is still not a terribly popular politician in a lot of places in this country. He's popular enough among Republicans. He's popular enough to make a national race tight, but he's not overwhelmingly popular. In fact, he just lost the presidential election. And in addition to him sort of involving himself in handpicking some of the weakest of Republican candidates in the 2022 midterms, he also reasserted himself into the race in a way that we typically do not see outgoing presidents, in particular presidents who have lost the presidential race, reinsert themselves in the very next midterm. Typically what happens, and typically one of the things that allows the out party, the party that's out of power, to come back and sweep back into power in the next midterms, is that losing presidential candidates from the previous election, or the person who had left the presidency stays out of it, such that the next election becomes entirely a referendum of, do you like who's in power right now and what they've been doing? In those circumstances, Democrats should have expected to struggle, because you can make a case that things have not gone terribly well over the last 2 years, or really you can always make that case, essentially, because compared to the perfect scenario that doesn't exist, reality will always be a disappointment. Instead of allowing this election to be entirely a referendum on Joe Biden and the Democrats, Donald Trump reasserted himself very publicly into the race, never essentially gone away, and through election season in the fall held lots of rallies that were ostensibly about the candidates he was supporting, but were in reality really about him. This makes it once again more of a choice. Do you prefer Biden and the Democrats, or do you prefer Donald Trump? At least for a number of voters, at least for enough voters to put this back into a situation where it doesn't look like a classic midterm, and probably, and this is where the real caveat comes in, and we'll know once all the votes are tallied, probably led to higher Democratic turnout among Democratic voters than you typically would see in a midterm, which helped Democrats across the country. And the last thing I think that mattered here, that structure this election, is that we continuing to see those in the public have hardened partisanship. That is, people are more attached and more loyal to their partisan identification than ever before. And this can somehow after every election, we write that partisan loyalties and partisan attachments matter more than ever before. And then the next election, we have to say, no, actually, this time they mattered more than ever before. It means it's harder, it's been harder and harder for the last 20, 30, 40 years to get voters to essentially split their tickets, to vote one way in some elections and another way in another election. This means it's simply just harder to get elections to swing and to get voters to swing back and forth between the two sides, which should particularly lead to sort of like smaller swings in who wins this election, who wins that election, and smaller swings in who wins this district this time and who wins that district the next time. As a result, we're kind of in this situation of trench warfare between the two parties. There's a lot of districts, the vast majority of districts, that one side can win and the other cannot make enough headway to win back. And now between 2020 and 2022 in particular, we've seen pretty narrow swings, a relatively small number of seats that were really at the end of the day, able to swing one way or the other. And the real question is this the political environment that we'll be in for the relative near future, where it's sort of trench warfare between the parties with little opportunity for gains and losses, or does something change such that we could see sort of a 2006 or a 2010 style big wave come in sometime in the next 2 or 4 or 8 years? And that I don't know, but that's what I do know. So,
thank you for the opportunity to be here today. This club has a remarkable history, as I've learned. I appreciate what your candidates and office holders have done for Utah State University. Many of our interns have worked with various Democratic leaders and office holders around the state. Personally, Sherry Swenson issued my marriage license. And not just issued it, but in about a week, 20 years ago, I was out of state and had to get the marriage license the night that I flew in on a red eye from Long Island. And Sherry Swenson stayed up till 12:30 at night, so that when my wife and I showed up her divorce stuff, that we would be able to get married the next day. And we're celebrating our 20th anniversary. We're still together. So I do a lot of appreciation for the level of service and service orientation behind this club and the individuals who are supported and representing this group. So Jim spoke about a lot of the dynamics in the national political scene in this last election. And so I'll take a couple of minutes to talk about things taking place in the state of Utah in the 2022 midterm election cycle. On some level, if I were to summarize Jim's findings, which I think are spot on, I'm always feel fortunate when I get to be at an event and where Jim's on the agenda. He's a great political scientist. A spot on analysis. Look, Republicans just significantly underperformed every expectation that was set out on the national level. On first blush, someone might be tempted to say that might not be as true in the state of Utah as it was nationally. So let's talk about that a little bit, why that might be at first blush. And then I'm actually going to make the case that in the same way Jim argued nationally, yeah, Republicans made some gains, but nowhere near what they should have. I think there's a case to be made that actually Democrats did overperform in the state of Utah relative to some of the headwinds they were facing. So we'll have 4 congressional districts. And the Democrats perform under 35% in vote share across all 4 of those districts. Someone might say, well, wait a second, how could that in any sense be overperforming? Well, guys, let's be honest. Every independent assessment of the new congressional maps in the state of Utah shows that those districts are significantly drawn to advantage Republicans. I don't think that comes as any surprise to people in this room that that's the case. But that being the case, the pattern it feels like we've observed in Utah over the last maybe even 30 years is you get a Republican legislature that redraws boundaries, and the districts are less competitive in the year ending in the number 2. And then you watch demographic change as it shifts, growth in migration, and just changes in partisan alignment over the course of that time period. And what you find is that by the time you get to years ending in 6 and then 8 and then 0, elections are much more competitive. And so and then we go through the cycle all over again following the election. Crap, things change. We have to change the boundaries again. There had been some hope that the independent redistricting initiative would adjust that. The legislature made some changes. There's a variety of different approaches to how redistricting is done, and even in the range where there are commissions rather than a direct legislation, a legislature directly setting boundaries, you still don't tend to see a very strong, true independent streak out of those commissions until you get to the very most independent. There's a group of a political scientist by the name, or he's a law professor at the University of Colorado, now is political science trained. Doug Spencer says really there's about 6 to 8 states that are doing this in a truly independent sort of way. So whether it was the legislature's interference or just that the initiative didn't go far enough before it got changed anyways, I don't know. But it's very, very difficult to reach a true neutral map drawing process. And this is true across the vast majority of the United States. Utah happens to be controlled by Republicans in the legislature. And so we get maps that look like the maps that we have. But these elections are the starting point for building and rebuilding for the successes or improvement at least that can come in the election cycles yet to come. The Senate race in Utah, the word unprecedented has been used an unprecedented number of times in the last several years. I would like to go back to living in precedented times rather than unprecedented times personally. But the nature of the Senate race was something that's really unique. As people have asked me, have you seen anything like this? Are you aware of anything like this? And really, no. I'm not familiar with great examples of what transpired there. In the spirit of full disclosure, Evan McMullen and I were roommates for about 3 months in Washington, D.C. I did not speak with Evan for about 20 years after that, not because of any ill will that occurred during that time span, but just I share that to say that we're not particularly close. I did have him up to guest lecture in my class several months ago. But I feel like I ought to at least disclose that. But I feel like I can give an impartial analysis of the situation. But so we have the Democratic Party faced with, I think, just a really heart-wrenching decision, right? You have an incumbent senator who is perhaps as unpopular in the Democratic Party as any Republican senator in the history of the state of Utah. And we don't have polls that go back that far, but Mike Lee's kind of in Ted Cruz territory for the way he's perceived among Democrats. So at the same time, so there's one tension where you say, I just would really, really love to unseat Mike Lee. But how do you also make that statement at the same time saying, but I don't care who takes his place? Mm-hmm. And this is the tension that the Democratic Party in Utah had to face. On the one hand, you say what, and where people came down on this, I think, depends on what their values are and what their objectives, not values in, just in terms of what their overall objectives are and what they hope to see out of an election. If your overall objective is first and foremost to maximize your chances of electing a Democrat to the Senate from Utah, there is one and only one choice you can make, and that is to nominate a Democratic candidate. Because if you do not nominate a Democratic candidate, you cannot have a Democrat win the seat. It's a foregone conclusion. If your priority is to unseat Mike Lee, then I could see someone making a choice that says, well, maybe we should not endorse a candidate, allow an independent candidate in Evan McMullen to move forward and compete in the election, with the thinking that if you believe that Evan McMullen had a better chance of winning that election than did a Democratic candidate who could have been nominated. Which of those is the right thing to value? I cannot tell you what you should value. All I can tell you is that I think it's a perfectly reasonable position to take either of those circumstances. And I hope that in spite of the fact that some people in the Democratic Party chose one direction and some opted to go the other direction, what will be most important for the Democratic Party's success in the future is to come back together as a party, not hold grudges or angst or those kinds of things against people who made one choice or the other. I think it's really unlikely that this ever happens again, personally. Had McMullen managed to win, I think there could have been some discussion in one-party states across the country as to whether or not this might be a viable strategy. Given that he was not successful, I think it's unlikely that we see this again on any sort of meaningful timeline. There's not, though, maximizing your chances of electing a Democrat are not the only reasons why you might choose not to have gone down this road, right? Part of the ongoing strategy behind a party is not just to win an election right now or to cause another person to lose an election right now. Part of the goal may well be to build the party, to strengthen the party's message, to get experience for candidates and those who support candidates, clubs, organizations, civic groups, to build capacity to continue supporting candidates and to get better at doing that, looking forward to an election that, or a time where things might be more competitive. Another reason you might opt to prefer to move forward a candidate, even if their chances of winning may not be strong, is that ultimately democracy is about giving people a choice. And sometimes it's worth it to run a candidate that you want to support, even if you don't think they're going to win, to give voters someone that they can really believe in, rather than someone where they have to kind of hold their nose as they check that box on the ballot before they mail it back in. So there are some reasons, that you guys, existential crisis is a phrase I've heard for some people trying to make the decision on this, and reviewing these same questions as people evaluate whether this was a good decision and whether it was worth it. Did it make for a competitive race? It did. This was the most. This was the highest percentage of the vote that a non-Republican candidate has received since Frank Moss won the seat, lost the seat to Orrin Hatch in 1976. That was just before I was born, to give you a sense of what the timeline is on that. We're still counting some votes. It's possible Ted Wilson in 1982 was at 41%. McMullen's hovering just shy of 42% at the moment. Looking at Ted Wilson's mark in 1982 also reminds us of some of the trends the state has gone through in the last 40 years. Spending. We have about $15 million in spending at the last mark that I saw by the candidates. And another $15 million spent by outside groups. This is hands down the most expensive race for anything we have ever seen in the history of the state of Utah. On some level, I like competitive races. I think competitive races are good for the country. In many ways are good for voters. I'd like to see a little higher quality of dialogue than the brutalizing negativity that we saw in the waning portion of that campaign, which ultimately I think hurt Evan McMullen in significant ways. But I like seeing competitive races because it maybe helps, reinforce if there's a choice, there's a variety of different outcomes that could be realized here. And so I think that there are some net positive things to that. And there's a part of me that likes to think that the fact that Mike Lee had to try, the fact that he had to work, the fact that he had to fundraise, and the fact that he sweated, not just a little, but a lot over the last 9 months, I think has some value in terms of inducing accountability and getting a candidate who had run very safely at every race he competed in previously to reevaluate maybe what kinds of texts he sends to certain people at certain moments. I won't specify anything beyond that. Or what kinds of comparisons he makes to and what kinds of choices that he makes. Is he a little more careful if he's a little more cautious in some of the things that he does in thinking about the scope or the breadth of the electorate in Utah that he's tasked to represent now that he's won this seat again? If that's the case, then there was something good, I think, that came out of the election, even if there wasn't a Democratic candidate on the ballot. So, so overall, what are we to make of that? I still can't tell you it was a great choice. I can't tell you it was a wrong choice. And we would not observe what we never get to observe the counterfaction. We only get to observe the world unfold in one way. Perhaps it could have been equally or more competitive in the presence of had they nominated Kale moving forward into that election. We won't know for sure. We can speculate. But a challenging decision, an interesting thing to be able to watch and study, but not something that I think is a choice that we're likely to see either in Utah or elsewhere moving forward. On the state legislative or local races, again, those maps didn't get scrutinized as heavily. We tend to spend a lot of time thinking about Congress. At some point, Utah is going to hit a point where my hunch is that the strategy shifts from what we call a cracking gerrymander, where you split, you're familiar with the pizza slice diagram kinds of things, where you split Democratic centers across districts so that the vote share is diluted. At some point, Utah is going to hit a point where we are going to see instead a packing gerrymander. In a packing gerrymander, you take all the Democrats, stuff as many of them into one district as possible, and then the remaining districts are all safe. Utah, I think, is on the cusp, may well be by the 2030 gerrymander, we'll call it 2030 redistricting. That will be the only choice that's left for a Republican legislature. While we focus on the congressional maps, the state legislative maps are also gerrymandered. Again, people who evaluate and study these sorts of things can demonstrate that these maps, independent evaluations in the state legislative maps suggest that they are similarly not as even-handed. You can't gerrymander to 100%. But I think we might have seen that if we could have, if it could have been done. But how many seats did the Democrats didn't lose seats? A couple that are close, but overall, you look back and in the 02 or the elections years ending in 2s, you tend to see setbacks for Democrats after a round of redistricting. In this cycle, things look like they're holding pretty steady. picking up a seat on the Salt Lake County Council, which we were surprised to see. Surprised to see the struggles of the Democratic Party on the Salt Lake County Council a couple of years ago. But seeing that kind of reverting back, all things considered, look, this could have been a much worse election year for Democrats in the state of Utah. And I think some of the same forces that Jim spoke about, right? A sluggish economy, but you put abortion rights, you put and Donald Trump on the ballot, and maybe those front and center, where the Republicans wanted to make this election about economic performance. And suddenly you get higher levels of turnout, you get better recruiting. Election denier candidates in Utah really struggled. Visiting, I talk with county clerks a lot in my line of work in my election studies. And I can tell you, even in the primary phase, there were multiple Republican county clerks in safe Republican districts, safe from a general election contest, who were terrified about primary elections from election denying candidates. Donald Trump endorsed heavily in Secretary of State races around the country. He wasn't super successful in a lot of those election efforts, but both nationally and in Utah, the election conspiracy issues have tended to be an issue and a limitation for candidates that held them back from being as successful as they might be. And that, I think, is a win for democracy in the United States. So with that, I'll wrap up, and maybe Jim and I can visit with you guys on some questions.
Can I ask a question?
You can, and I'll go ahead and repeat it. And if Jim, if you want to come up here, we'll kind of moderate. Before we take your question, if I may, I heard from Lanny, and I want to make sure that I have this right. There are still ballots being counted in Salt Lake County. And did you say there were about 99,000 ballots?
Yeah.
Y'all, the work's not done, okay? Our friends, Representative Liz Waite and Representative Claire Collard, will need help curing ballots. If you do not know what that is, come see me, come see Terry. We are the cure queens. It means that people's signature is wrong, they put it in the wrong envelope, they didn't sign it. This is going to be tight, and we are going to need friends to help over the next week and a half. Okay, so I'm putting you on notice. Those races are not lost. They are going to be razor thin. We always knew that. It was redistricted to be that way. All right. So I just wanted to say that. And one last thing, Jim just saw me pull out my phone. I think you all know that I was redistricted out of my district. I had the closest race in all of Utah, lost by 78 votes. I begged Alan to stay on the ballot. I said, please stay on the ballot. We need a baseline. I just need you to run and if you do nothing else, we need to know what that new district looks like. Alan paid $85 to file, doesn't have a campaign website, an email, not one Facebook post. He has 43% of the vote. So it crushes me, it crushes my very soul, because I know how to beat Stevie Ellison, but I am working on getting the next person ready to beat Stevie Ellison in 2 years.
I thought you were going to say you're going to move.
Listen, my husband and I have talked about a lot of things, and he's like, I don't want you to run. It's so hard. I'm like, yeah, I know. Yes, and I did want to recognize Representative Owens, who snuck in while we were having our we are so honored to have so many folks, so many friendlies here today. But Sherry, what was your question? Sorry.
Well, it's not really a question, but a statement. My name is Sharon Birkenshaw, and I am a diehard Democrat. I did, however, vote to support Evan McMullen in the race. Those were my own personal reasons. But I did want to tell you that I was on his website to pick signs up. You know, people would come by my house. I cannot tell you how many Republicans came to my home, knocked on my door and said, thank you so much for doing this. We really appreciate you having this opportunity for us. And I was really bowled over that. I just thought independents, Democrats would come pick up the signs, which they did. But Republicans, there was a lot.
Yeah, thank you
And
for
the
that.
comments that they made were very, very telling. I have been a Republican my whole life. I will not vote for Mike Lee. And I said, did you have family members who feel the same way? Oh, yeah. And these people would take like 5 and 6 signs, you know, for their families.
Well, the only way that we're gonna win down ballot races is if we have Republicans vote for Democrats.
Well, that's true.
Carol Moss had, we all, I mean, we have to, and so I think it was a
We
good
need to
building.
realize that this is not a Democrat or Republican thing always.
Right,
Now, I agree with,
Damon.
Damon, thank you. I agree with him that this probably will never happen again. And I probably would never go away from voting for a Democrat again. But I learned a lot from this. And I knocked on doors, and there is one thing I'm gonna tell you that I just think is the funniest thing in the world. There are people who will not answer the door. Okay, every year I go to their house. The last 2 times of elections, I have an Australian Shepherd, and I took her with me. They open the door every time.
Yeah, people love dogs. Jeff, welcome, yeah.
So at least I get an opportunity, you know, to do it. And I think it's goofy. I also have 2 standard poodles that are gorgeous. But that Australian Shepherd is the popular one.
If you run again, get a dog.
Thank you, and thank you for your comments. They're very interesting. I want to make a couple comments and then ask a question, but the move to against Mike Lee really began with the Democrats participating in that, really began with many Democrats changing parties to vote for Becky Edwards. And some of my favorite friends, like Tricia Beck, my cousin, who got me to run, she did that and she became a delegate and she went to the convention. And so it created a problem for Democrats in terms of our database.
Vote builder.
Vote
Vote builder.
builder, because you couldn't reliably see you were using the app if people were Democrats or not, because a lot of them said they weren't changing back.
Let me tell you what Carol's talking about, for if you don't know. There's an app that candidates use, and it tells you party affiliation. And we use that to do mailers, cut our turfs, know who our friendlies are, and usually, like, you stay away from really deep Republicans. Yeah, and who to mail to. And if people don't change their affiliation back, they're like, oh, I don't care, I'm gonna vote for whoever I want. It screws up your numbers and your strategy so bad. And nobody's talking about it. So thanks for saying that, Carol.
Right, and I think, you know, you might comment on this, that going forward, a lot of Democrats said, I'm not changing back because I don't have a voice otherwise in the primaries. So I wanted to point out one more thing when you talked about how many did we lose. We lost Suzanne Harrison right off the top.
That's right, that's true.
Because nobody ran in that district as Democrat to challenge, or did they?
No, it was a third party, but not Democrat.
Right. So that, I mean, that just kind of hit me a day or 2 ago. Not only are we at risk of losing Liz and Claire, and I look at that website extensively, I need to see if there are any new votes, but we lost her, so we're down to 14. But we've had, when I came in 2001 is my first session, we had 22 Democrats. And it really made a difference. The number of people on committees, for one, they needed our vote in many instances, so they collaborate with us a lot more. And we were down as low as 12, and we called ourselves the mighty 12, the dozen, right? And I just want to say to everybody, I mean, that is not the ideal where we are now. But we can still forge a path. There are only 6 senators in the Dems in the Senate, and we still can make a difference because you yourself, I often remind the Republicans, you know, we have a big constituency and it's as big as yours. And so we still can make a difference. So when people just write us off and say, oh, Democrat, oh, you're a Democrat, you can't get anything done, wrong. You pick the right issues and the right Republicans to partner with. Okay, so I'm through with that part.
Did you have a question, Carol?
I did have a question. I hope I won't remember it now. Okay, this is what I get your opinion on. It'll probably take some time, but not having kale. By the way, kale has set the standard for grace and good. Grace and harmony. When many of his supporters walked away from the party, which was a shame, but he did exactly the opposite. He did everything he could to help other Democrats get elected. So hooray for you, Kale. But can you see and put your forecast, I know it's hard, as political scientists, and see, look forward, or at least comment on whether you think that did harm to the party, drove people away, or what?
Whoever wants to take that.
I think potentially, but I think this is why I've been hesitant to comment on this until all the votes come in. There's so many votes, as we know, specifically in Salt Lake County, that haven't been recorded. And then without seeing what the vote totals are, it's hard to make real conclusions here. I think potentially, because I think one of the things we know, like from some research, is that it helps a party down ballot if they have an attractive, popular candidate with the same party label at the top of the ticket. And as you know, in the two statewide races here, neither of them had a Democrat on the ballot for Senate or for state treasurer. That my anticipation going into this election was that would hurt Democrats down ballot. Now, maybe that's not true, and I don't think I can say yet until all the votes are counted and reported, but I would say that's the biggest harm. And if that's the case, like, and that's just the short-term harm, the longer-term harm is, as a party, as you'll know, as Damon suggested, and he's right, like, what you want to do is try to build the party, which means showing the public appealing candidates that can get behind that happen to be in your party. And so I think those are two places where it potentially could have been harmful, but I don't think I can definitively say that yet.
I agree with everything Jim just said. In the long term, if this is the one blip on the radar and then things go back to normal, I don't think there's likely to be lasting challenges for the Democratic Party from this one election cycle choice. But obviously, in the long run, it's no way to build a party to strategically choose in election cycle after election cycle not to do that. One place where the Utah Democratic Party performs very well relative to the disadvantaged party in so-called one-party states is that Utah does a pretty good job of we see more contested races for the party identification ratio in the state. We see more contested races than you would see in, say, Massachusetts, where the Massachusetts Republican Party doesn't really do as good of a job as kind of the out party in that state. Obviously the R and the D are flipped there, but they just don't contest as aggressively as the Utah Democratic Party does. But as Jim pointed out, those down ballot candidates often can write a surge of 3, 5, or more points, depending on how strong an up ballot candidate is running. Because very few people say, all right, I'm going to vote because, well, the county coroner is the most important race on the ballot. We don't elect coroners in Utah. They do in some states, but nobody turns out for that race. You turn out because you're really excited about who's running for governor. You're really excited about who's running for Senate. You're really excited about who's running for president, and you see shifts in turnout based on those kinds of things. So I think that's important to consider.
Who had? Oh, goodness, there's lots of questions. Oh, go ahead, sir.
I just want to say that I think that having McMullen's run as an independent was a really good thing. I supported Becky Edwards in her primary ballot because she was moderate, would work across the aisle. Same way with Evan McMullen. He was willing to work with both parties, not like Mike Lee, who's one of the 3 worst senators in the United States Senate. And the main thing is to get that guy out. And I don't, so anyway.
Thank you. Damon talked about that quite a bit. So, who was next? Was it Angela? Josie Valdez.
I wanted to address the issue of going outside of the Democratic Party for candidates, because I served as vice chair of the state Democratic Party. And my role was to recruit candidates. And it's really hard because we were calling all of the different precincts, the 29, trying to help them get candidates. And if you've got a person that you're trying to recruit and they go, yeah, but what if the party abandons me the last minute? It's hard enough to recruit candidates as it is. It's very, very difficult. So I was one of the ones who said, I'm a true blue Democrat. If there's a Democrat running, I'm going to vote for him. I ran for lieutenant governor, knowing that we were not going to win, but the message that we give about our values and our party and that we're true blue Democrats encourages other Democrats. So I am true blue Democrat all the way.
Thank you, Josie. Before, I wanted to say something. Kale's team let me know, speaking, there's a lot of healing that needs to take place. We're in a bit of a therapy session right now, but not really. We'll get back to questions. But I want all my candidates to know, I'm so proud of you. And Team Weston is going to host a meeting for us candidates. I put myself in that category, it's right there with you. It'll be December 6th. I'll give you some more information. It's going to be at the Hunter Library. And the Weston campaign, we're just going to talk. We'll know a little bit more then. We'll know exactly how everything landed. We'll have some more data, what went well, what didn't go well. But we want to continue the conversation. And Josie's right. It is hard to, you've begged candidates, right? Just get on the ballot, just do it. We're going to help you, right? And this organization, I wanted to say this again, we have advanced, we have upped our game. I hope that our candidates feel supported. And I hope that you know how much effort we put into you with trainings. And my friend and my mentor, Patrice, we had some office hours just trying to give you extra support. We want to be one of those organizations that continues to support candidates. So hopefully when Josie or I or Terry Goodall or somebody calls and says, would you please get on the ballot? And I don't know what kind of help you're going to get, but I know that the Women's Democratic Club is going to help you, right?
As a bit of trivia, Frank Moss won his first Senate election because there was a Republican and there was an independent conservative, and they split the conservative vote and Frank won.
That was one prevailing theory. We talked about that quite a bit as a possibility.
So I actually have a follow-up question about Kale. Just the amount of leading he did, the amount of time he dedicated, and it wasn't just for show. I'm telling you, that man showed up and knocked doors with me in 105-degree weather, and he knocked doors with me in 30-degree raining weather. So I think it's not just for show. But what does that do, right? Because we talked about the potential damage to the party by not running a Dem candidate at the top of the ticket. What kind of healing has that potentially done for the party with Kale doing that? And then my second question is actually around the coordinated campaign efforts that both the state and the county parties did for, my campaign, Lainey's campaign, Suzanne's, but then with the House candidates and coordinating with them in Salt Lake County as well.
I'm trying to remember exactly how the first question was worded again. How much does it help that Kale was out there? I think that makes a big difference. And it's something that I think that I talked to a lot of reporters like for the last 6 months, very specifically about the Lee McMullen stuff. And I think the most important thing that a minority party in a state can do is get out there and meet voters and go door to door and coordinate and try to shift the perception of your party among voters who might be shiftable. And that's not short-term work. It's not something where you spend 2 years doing that and all of a sudden now you win. That's long-term work. But that's the type of thing that you see in other parts of the country where you've seen sort of minority parties grow in strength and in capacity and sometimes score big upsets. A lot of that starts on the ground with that kind of hard work. And so I think, what Cal was doing with that and what many of you have been doing with that work is is huge. So
And is Ashley, is that your, I can see your face. What was your question about the coordinated campaign?
So
The county coordinated, Salt Lake County?
that actually, so the county candidates, the 5 and 6, I remember, we ran a coordinated campaign. But then we also coordinated with the state party for the House district candidates that overlap. So like when I would go knock doors, I would have all 5 county lit plus whatever House district I was knocking in. That was overlapping with my district. Same thing with a lot of our House districts. They did that for the Senate district.
Is there a lot of research on the value of coordinated campaigns?
So, so my hunch is yes. In fact, I'm going to share a quote with you from Cann Melman. Please don't throw anything at Cann Melman was the chair of the RNC and was an integral part of George W. Bush's victories in 2000 and 2004. I am not quoting him because he's a Republican. I'm quoting him because he's a political strategist who helped to engineer some successful campaigns and had some insights, I think, that are helpful in seeing the way campaigns work. So the quote goes something like this: the most successful way to win somebody's vote is to show up on their doorstep with not just with any random person, but with someone, and this is going to be clear to Republicans, someone from their church, someone from their gun club. But then there's going to be different associations there on the Democratic side of the aisle, likely. Although there's some Democrats who like to shoot guns, and there's some Democrats who go to church. So there's but someone you know shows up on the doorstep and says, "Hey, this is what I'm doing." You work together at clean. They know you in the neighborhood because you've talked about you've participated in clean air rallies together. You've been in the PTA together with your kids and their kids at school, and that person comes and they come to talk to you in an effort and say, "Hey, this is what I'm doing. This is where I'm going." So if you have ways. I don't know the specific nature of the way these coordinated campaign efforts have unfolded. Person-to-person contact is far more effective than anything else. Phone helps, but having the right kind of training for the people who are on the phone is something that's been shown in randomized controlled trials to be important. Robocalls have been shown to be minimal to no effectiveness for those. You annoy and alienate as many people with robocalls as you get on your side. So to the extent that you're doing anything that gets you out there on doorsteps talking to voters, that is very good and has the highest potential to move people, both to persuade them to turn out to vote. That's a little easier to do, or to even change their mind about whom to vote for. That's a little harder to do. And then if you can get someone on the doorstep who they know or would recognize, or at least in some way identify with as an important person in their community, who they would relate to, then it's going to be even more effective still. So anything you can do in terms of contacting has clear evidence in favor of it. The more personal and proximate the contact is, the stronger the effect will be.
Thank you. We are running a little bit short on time, so we'll take just a couple more questions and feel free to mingle afterwards as well. So who is up next? Okay.
Okay, I'll be quick, sorry. I didn't want to say anything about Evan McMullen, but I will say this. I have, being a councilwoman at the municipal level, we are unaffiliated. I've had more Republican colleagues ask me if I'm willing to switch my party because of all the despair that happens within the Democratic Party. I will say this, as a Latina candidate and councilperson, Latinos are more persuaded to be Republican. And I know that for a fact because of my father. I considered it for the reason of persuading Latinos, right? To get them engaged. But my values are Democrat. And what I saw this last year was really disheartening, down to having police up and down the aisles at convention.
And that's something that we need to really heavily address. As a councilwoman and it being in my district, I had to address it directly with our chief because of an incident that happened. So I wasn't going to say anything, but I want you all to be very aware. I am very proud to have Robin's support in the Women's Democratic Club and Josie and Mark and everybody else. But there's a few that I'm just like, because I don't look like you, because I don't speak like you, because my background may not be the same, I feel very little within the Democratic Party, and that is really unfortunate. I didn't want to say anything, but I think we also need to address that because we have some amazing candidates of color within this party. I kind of want to know your perspective on what's to come. I think you spoke very great about getting on the doors and some of our races that we saw this last election cycle. Some of them had a very low voter turnout. But I think what do you think we should do in terms of now to the next election? What are some of the things that we can do to help bring out voter turnout?
I think this is the risk of oversimplifying everything. But I think at the end of the day, the recipe to success or to like trying to build success for a party is run the best candidates you can find in every single race, even if it's a race you're going to lose. And then do the kind of thing that Damon was talking about of run a campaign where you're finding yourself or other people to meet voters, talk to voters, try to get them to show up and try to persuade them. And that's hard work, and it's a lot of work. But I think if that's what the Democratic Party here did for the next 10 years, you would see a consequence. And I know it's easier said than done. I know in particular, it's hard to find candidates, but the more races where you can have a Democrat on the ballot who can connect with voters, the better off you are in the long run, which hopefully is just the type of motivator that you can give people to try to get them to run. You can just put their name on the ballot, if nothing else, and find out where your baselines are everywhere.
That's a really great summary of an excellent political campaign. But yeah, look for candidates. Finding candidates who have name recognition to start with certainly always helps. People who are recognized and appreciated in their communities, not necessarily even because of their politics, but just because of who they are as a person, I think is a positive and helpful thing. And then work. It's not a success story for the Democratic Party yet. Patrick Belmont is a colleague of mine at Utah State University who thought, well, why not? I'll give this a shot. There was a brand new district, and his opponent, incumbent Dan Johnson, had a lot of the district was new to him, as well as being naturally new to Patrick. Patrick knocked on every door in the district. He worked really hard, and on some level, he's going to surface, I think, with somewhere in the neighborhood of 43–44% of the vote likely when all said and done.
That's up 14 points.
That's up a huge amount.
Huge.
And in a district that appears to be contiguous on paper, but it actually, I don't know if you know Cache Valley geography, it kind of goes up Logan Canyon around the mountains and then grabs a couple rural communities on the north end of Cache Valley. And Patrick ran a great campaign. And the game is not just about necessarily this election, but building upon successes that can over time change into circumstances where people can win. So
He stops running.
he may well do. And just one other thread I'll pick up there is just we have some work as a society to do on civility, and especially when it comes to showing love and compassion to people whose backgrounds are different than ours, whether they look different than us, whether they think different and believe different. I'm honestly a little worried about where we're at as a country, and I really appreciate your sentiments on that front, and hope that we can just do a little bit better about loving each other. That doesn't mean that someone has to be less of a Democrat or less of a Republican than they are. I think we can still hold those core beliefs in many instances and still be respectful and civil in our dialogue. And things like having to have the cops at a convention, there's plenty of shenanigans going on at Republican conventions too. But we got to do. We got to find ways to be together better and disagree better than we have to do.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. Yeah, we'll let Robin ask a question, and I do want to give Darlene, because Darlene's had, and Mark, sorry. We'll do three real quick. How about Mark first?
I have a comment, I have a question. When I went door to door, and this is the district that I represent, I took somebody with Planned Parenthood with me, just to let you.
Okay.
When you were talking about somebody with the church or somebody with PTA, I took somebody with Planned Parenthood, and it worked out fine. I was elected.
Good deal. That's.
The question that I have for you is, what do you think of getting rid of the caucus system? Would that change any of the outcomes of the, I know possibly in the Republican Party, I'm not quite sure in the Democratic Party.
So sorry, after you answer that real quick, we're gonna go to Angela, who's had her hand raised. I'm so sorry, Angela. And then we're gonna have Darlene real quick, and then Robin. So we're gonna speed right through it. And if you need to leave, I know it's 1 o'clock. But thank you.
Okay. So I'll try to take a first shot at that. It would have less of an effect from what I've seen in the Democratic Party than it has in the Republican Party. We're going into lightning round, so I'm going to try to talk fast here. Surveys by the Utah Foundation, among others, show that the difference between delegates to the Democratic Convention and general Democrats in the electorate in issue prioritization there's only modest differences. On the Republican side, there are huge differences between what the delegates to the convention indicate their issue priorities are and what the average run-of-the-mill registered Republican wants. Now, what that means, I've got all kinds of issues with the caucus system, and I better just, I'm going to say that and then leave it there, and maybe we can talk for a minute afterwards. But the implications of eliminating the caucus system could have some upside and downside. If you believe in the spatial theory of voting, kind of this, you can organize everybody from left to right, most liberal to most conservative, and voters vote for the person who's closest to them. You eliminate the caucus system, you probably start getting more moderate Republican candidates, right? Trevor Lee wins because he beat out Steve Handy in a caucus with a handful of voters who are much more ideologically extreme. Steve Handy, much more moderate Republican in the legislature. So, but you start getting more moderate Republicans coming out of the nominating process, and it becomes, in theory, more challenging for Democrats to win elections because they're covering a broader span. So on the upside, you eliminate the caucus system and you might get more moderate Republicans somewhat, but in that situation, Democrats, by the spatial theory of voting, would probably have a harder time winning. Take that thinking for what it's worth.
Jim, you nailed it.
Angela?
So one of you guys mentioned the Florida gubernatorial race. So I'm originally from Broward County, north of Fort Lauderdale. My town's literally called North Lauderdale. But when you said that one of the strengths that Republicans had in Florida was a strong candidate, and I have a question. So Charlie Crist, I don't know if you guys know about him. He's ran for office essentially 3 times and has lost. At what point do you? Or is that like a conversation you have where you say, maybe you shouldn't run for this? Or do you say, maybe you should run because you should have learned a lesson in the last run? Like, does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so contextual from case to case, right? Like, I think sometimes the candidate runs and they run strongly and they lose. And there's a case to, as you're saying with Damon's, that person should run again because they can build on the success they had. They can build on the name recognition they started to build, and next time you might see them improve. However, in a case like someone like Charlie Crist, trying to think of a delicate way to put it. Yeah.
The Buffalo Bills.
I mean, you got some success a long time ago. right? But like the trend's going the wrong way. And like, that's the thing to look for. And if like you have a candidate who's performing more poorly each time. And you know, I think it's fair to say that then as a party, you probably want to get to move on. And like, and that's true for both parties all over the place. Sometimes you want to move on, if you catch my drift.
I'll just say, if you've been, I'm sensing that there's some people in this room who've been around Utah politics for a long time. So I would call it the Merrill Cook problem. Just running over and over and over again for anything you can throw your hat in, any party label that will have you. And that's, yeah, Charlie Crist at this point is not a super strong candidate.
Darlene, and then we're gonna end with Robin, and thank you all so much.
Yeah, thank you. I actually had a lot I wanted to say, but since we are out of time, Jim, I wanted to say thank you once again for agreeing to moderate that debate. That was but I actually wanted to piggyback off of what Mike was asking, because I'm really curious as to how you teach political science in Utah because of the caucus system that we have here. And the way that we do it here in Utah, I believe is unique to Utah. There are other states that have the caucus system, but not tied into the way that we do it with convention. So Utah is the only state that actually does it the way we do it. So when it comes to Utah politics and how we select our candidates at the caucus, at the convention, how does that influence how you teach political science?
First, yeah, I was very happy to, I'll just say this before I hand it to the mic to Damon. I was extremely happy to get to moderate your debate. And then Darlene, I can't tell you how many people I heard from afterwards who were very impressed by you and your story.
What a great thing is, you know, I don't know if you face pressure from people not to do that. The debate commission was not pleased by that happening, ironically. Some people in the debate commission, I heard from some, I'm not on their board anymore, but they didn't like being told no, but the fact that that debate got to happen was just a win for you. So, you know, look, I teach my students what the caucus convention process is, what it looks like, and how it works. And I feel like I have to do that because it develops civic competence so that they can go out and they can participate and they can be as effective as they choose to be, as I can possibly prepare them to be, if they choose to do so, in participating in the system as it is configured. I feel like I have to do that because what I really want for my students coming out is civic competence so that they can go out and be good citizens, effective at participating in whatever ways they choose to go out and do that. I want them to have the skills to do it. I do encourage them to think about critically about the structure of the system, because the system does have implications for politics. Caucuses are great because they are deliberative. People sit down, they talk to each other, they have discussions about what's going on with candidates. I sit with my neighbors and get to talk to them about political issues of interest, and that deliberation has value. And so I tell my students about that. But I also teach my students, what do we want in a system? Do we want it to be deliberative? That's a virtue, but do we want it to be representative? And to the extent that there is slippage between the delegates and the views of the people, caucuses may be deliberative, but they are less representative, especially on the Republican side. And so I talk to them about, you know, here's how you engage. Here's how this process works. Please go out and participate in it. But I also encourage my students to think critically about what the system is, how it's structured, and why it works the way it does, and how it might be made better. So that as they come forward in the years that lie ahead, and they become, you know, the ones who are making decisions. I don't have a former student in the legislature yet. I hope to someday. I have multiple who are on city councils, and I have one who's married to a member of the legislature. But those students are going to go out and they're going to be the ones that are deciding what Utah politics looks like 20 years from now. And I think that if I teach them not just how to engage in the system as it is, but to think about how systems ought to be, then I can help them to shape the future of the state in the ways that they choose to when they are the ones who are sitting in those seats and throwing the switches.
Bring it home, Robin.
Okay, because we are the Women's Democratic Club, I would like, if you can, to comment on women that got elected. We had some women governors get elected. I mean, I think women had a pretty good so far nationally. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, I think that's right. I'm trying to think of like where to focus, because I think that's right. I think this is what? Kansas, both governor and House race. Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan, like just like across the board, you saw women have another strong election cycle. It's kind of 3 straight election cycles, with 2018 being sort of a year of the woman for Democrats, but 2020 being the year of women for Republican women running in 2020, which was nice to see. And now in 2022, we've seen it in a lot of places, including in statewide races at the gubernatorial level. I think the last example I wanted to bring up was there's this large cohort of sort of more moderate Democratic candidates who are running in districts that Trump won once or twice across the country in the US House, who pulled it out, which I think says a lot about the strength that you can have as a female candidate, whether it's Abigail Spanberger or Angie Craig in Minnesota, or Lee Slotkin in Michigan. These were people that have now twice been predicted to lose re-election and have twice pulled it out, in some cases increased their margins. So I think that's if you're a woman and you want to be a candidate, or you are a candidate, I think you should take solace and encouragement from the fact that these women that people told them they were going to lose now twice, and they just seem to get stronger. And so I think there's a wonderful lesson there.
Well, I'll echo that. Abigail Spanberger, I would commend as a case study that's very relevant to the Utah context, because I was driving through her district last week just before the election. I was giving a talk at the University of Virginia Law School, and drove from DC down there and listened to the ads and such. I'm just going to commend that as a case study for y'all. I think Gretchen Whitmer is an incredibly interesting figure. And what Democrats do in the presidential nomination cycle, looking forward to 2024, is a question we ought not to open at this moment. But if Joe Biden was not renominated by the party, I think Gretchen would be a very formidable candidate, and a lot of interest there. The last thing I'll mention, there's an amazing group of women in the Utah State Legislature, Representative Catherine Knopf among them. And you guys have great examples right here in the state of Utah. We had Angela Romero up speaking at a Women in Politics event at Utah State, and I got to visit with her a little bit when she was up. And plenty of others, Luz Escamilla, and just a great set of people. You've got people who know how to do this, who are fantastic examples and role models for younger candidates, and are a group of people that I think this club would be very, very proud to call their own.
Thank you all so much for this amazing, great conversation. Thanks to everybody who came, and I send a welcome to Jim and Damon. Welcome anytime at the Women's Democratic Club. So thank you, everyone. Please feel free to mingle. There's trash over there if you can bust your own table. So thank you so much.